Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Boropolis Podcast. We are back with the both of us as usual. Nathan, we said last week that Middlesbrough can build you up and knock you down. We said in a fantasy world we could be recording this podcast with 3 signings in, 6 points on the board. We have got 1 signing in, but we don't have 6 points. I think that's the best way to put it. We have a lot less. It's been a fairly underwhelming week. I think I could put it that way. So, Nathan, to start off, and I'm probably going to be able to guess how you'll answer this one. How are you doing after that week of Borough?
It's early days. I think that needs to be said. If it was later in the season, I think I'd be a bit more frustrated, but frustrated is the word of the day at this moment in time. 2 games in a week and 1 point on the board from 2 games where 3 points on Wednesday night looked wrapped up until the final 5 minutes, and a trip to Reading on Saturday, which, God, it's a long old trip, I'll tell you that, having done it, and to come away with nothing makes the trip all the more longer. So a week that wasn't so thrilling as a Middlesbrough fan, but we'll get into dissecting it, and things do seem to be looking up going into this week.
Yeah, they do. But going back now, it feels like, I don't know if it feels longer because I've just sort of written off the last week, or should I say written off from around the 91st minute of the Stoke game since then. But we do have to go back a little further because, and I'll take responsibility for this, Nathan. I made a fatal error in the last podcast and failed to mention one big bit of news in the transfer section. Of course, I'm talking about the departure of Uche Ikpeazu. You know, I'm willing to say it was my fault. I did the notes. I forgot him, which is terrible on my part. But of course, we're not going to spend half an hour discussing the exit, but it would have been very disrespectful considering the absolutely wonderful exit message that he posted and some of the good moments he gave us in a Middlesbrough shirt, albeit probably not as many as what either party would have hoped. Of course, he's now gone to Turkey. That was confirmed. Nathan, just quickly, and I know we're a little, well, I say a little, probably a week behind on that, but we have to mention it. Just your thoughts on that exit.
Yeah, in the past, I've had absolutely zero interest in what goes on in Turkish football, but now my interest has spiked considerably. Uche has gone to Konyaspor. I didn't know a lot about the club, and I've had a Google, and it appears that they're in the UEFA Conference League this season. So Uche is playing European football on Thursday night.
Do you know what? I'm actually not sure if they've been knocked out already, but we'll just still say that he's playing in Europe.
Well, anyway, it appears that Konyaspor are massive, and they've now got a massive forward as well. And yeah, I really hope that Uche goes over to Turkey, settles into life well over there, and does get a sustained run in the side over there. And hopefully he'll be a success over there, because it's always difficult for English players to leave England and play abroad, and especially in a country like Turkey as well, where the culture's a little bit different, and of course the style of football over there is a bit different as well. So best of luck to Uche. He departs with all my best wishes.
Yeah, I mean, Nathan, as he says there, has taken a keen interest in Turkish football already. I've already had numerous Turkish football posts sent to me, both of Uche and, anything to do with Uche, really. So I think this one's probably affected Nathan more than it has me. But I echo what he says. Uche appears who always give 100% playing for Middlesbrough. Okay, it didn't work out, but I think it's the best decision for both parties. So we had to touch on it, but fair play to Uche. He's got his move, and we send our best wishes to him with his future. But now, Nathan, moving on from Uche to a slight fast forward from the Uche news, because that was, really poor on my behalf. But fast forwarding a little bit to last week, Stoke City away, we spoke about the types of games that Stoke City are renowned for, the sort of narrative of a cold, wet, windy night in Stoke. Before we start actually discussing the action, I thought it was quite interesting that Wilder was sort of having none of that, to be honest. He got asked about it in his press conference. It's a tough place to go, all that sort of narrative that I've just mentioned. And he was saying, no, I think that's gone. I think that's in the past. Probably a lot to do with Tony Pulis. I'd have to agree with him on that. But I was a little bit shocked because I still view, I want to call it the Britannia. Obviously, it's not called the Britannia anymore. That is throwing it back a good few years now. But obviously, away at Stoke, I always view it as one where you think, well, it's never, ever going to be an easy game. But I think Chris Wilder sort of tried to dispel that myth on his own, to be honest.
Yeah, strange, but Wilder's probably got good memories there, got promoted there with Sheffield United on the final day a few seasons ago with a 2-2 draw there. But in terms of an away ground for Middlesbrough, we always seem to struggle at Stoke. I think I did see something in the build up to the game that said we'd only won 2 of our last 13 at Stoke, which is not great at all, really, and didn't fill me with much hope going into the game. But from the outset and going into the game and then the first sort of 20 minutes, my confidence grew, and I think a lot of Middlesbrough fans thought that Stoke were probably going to be there for the taking.
Yeah, I think you're right. And before, obviously, we get into that first 20 minutes and obviously a more in-depth look at the game, we'll, of course, first cover team news. Dale Frye, Marcus Force and Chuba Akpom, of course, who has picked up an injury. We're still sort of unaware specifically of how long it's going to be, but I think the sort of whispers are a few weeks, which, of course, after the Sheffield United game was a massive loss. And of course, Dale Frye, who was dragged off against Sheffield United, again taking his place. On the bench, incoming to the team were Mark Bowler, Alex Mowat and Duncan Watmore. A little bit of a surprise on that front for me. I must admit, I didn't really see Watmore coming into the team, but I guess it was sort of forced. And then with the Dale Frye situation, which I think we'll touch on a little bit later, at that time it was slightly more of a shock again. Of course, I think we probably expected Alex Mowat to come in, given that he's had a full pre-season. Wilder said he was ready to play games. So with the team news, Nathan, were there any shocks or disappointments with that?
I think the only real shock for me was Wilder not opting for an out-and-out front two. He's opted for Riley McGree in the 10 behind Watmore, and I suppose that was sort of the way that we did end the Sheffield United game a few days prior, with McGree in the 10 for playing a bit further forward. And it seems that is another option for us going forward. Wilder seems to like Riley McGree playing a bit further forward rather than that 8 where Alex Moore was. So perhaps that, but I suppose in the Championship, you always hear about the grueling schedule, and the first sort of week where we have 3 fixtures, it needed changing, possibly, just so players can get that recovery and get more minutes in other players' legs as well. So, yeah, wasn't too surprised with the changes, but just a bit gutted that Tuba's out for the few weeks that he is now. It looked as though Tuba was comfortably our best forward in terms of his influence in the game and what he was bringing to our side. But yeah, hopefully he'll be back fit and firing very soon.
Yeah. Obviously echoing all of that, especially with the Tuba news, as you say, I think he'd sort of established himself as, probably arguably the first name on the team sheet, really. Of course, after that brace, it made it all the more disappointing. But we await his return, and hopefully that is sooner than expected. On to the game now, and actually Borough started quite well on the front foot, sort of picking up really where we left off in the Sheffield United game. Of course, the width of Ryan Giles and Isaiah Jones, as we expect now from this Middlesbrough team. But despite such a good start and a lot of Middlesbrough possession, we were actually hit with a sucker punch. Arguably, it should have been disallowed. I think in hindsight and looking back, it probably should have been disallowed. Isaiah Jones facing his own goal, fouled from the Stoke left back, and the referee just doesn't pick up on it. From that point, I think it turns into a 3-on-1. Gale's slipped in. Lenahan is sort of trying his best to close the angle off towards Jacob Brown, but Gale manages to slip Brown in, and then a first-time finish. And against the run of play completely, Stoke were 1-0 up, Nathan.
Yeah, massively against the run of play. Borough dominated the early proceedings very comfortably, and the Bet365 crowd were getting on Stoke's back as well. A few boos and murmurs were creeping in, and just as Borough looked like they're going to get that first goal of the game, really, and make the breakthrough and kill any sort of atmosphere within the ground, Stoke find themselves in that position where they've got that overload on our defence. And yeah, Gale finds Brown, and it's a good finish in all fairness, from about 12 yards out, just strokes the ball home. And yeah, a massive sucker punch, massively undeserved on the balance of play in the game. And from what we've heard from Wilder as well, the referee and his assistant apologised at half-time for not flagging for a foul when the replay shows that Jordan Thompson just clips Isaiah Jones and does not win the ball at all. So we know everything about Championship referees at this point. You just have to deal with it, unfortunately, and make sure that you put your chances away, because things like that can happen where a decision goes against you and you concede, unfortunately. So, yeah, 1-0 down, and Borough had a bit of a mountain to climb.
Yeah, they did. And, actually, that mountain quickly was climbed up. Or have I phrased that right? That doesn't sound right to me. But
climbed, yeah.
We'll go with it. Yeah, climbed. I think the last week's just fried my brain, to be honest. I'm saying words in this podcast and not actually thinking if they even make sense. But yeah, Borough did manage to get back on level terms, and deservedly so. Paddy McNair flicks on and Alex Mowat sort of crossfield / a bit of a cross into the box. And it makes its way out to Isaiah Jones. He then drops it back into McGree. McGree plays the 1-2. And as we expect, really, from Isaiah Jones, that sort of cross, I guess you could call it a pass, because it seems to always find a Middlesbrough player across the face of the Stoke goal. Duncan Watmore does well to lose his man, gets across the face of goal and just flicks it in for that equaliser. Thoroughly deserved, Nathan, and actually a very well-worked goal.
Yeah, it was. It was well worked. A bit different to what we usually see from Isaiah Jones in terms of beating his man. We've said in the last few podcasts at the start of this season that Isaiah Jones's game is having to change a little bit, and he's not beating his fullback as often, or even attempting to, and he's trying to play them early balls into the box. And upon receiving the 1-2 back from Riley McGree, he puts a fantastic ball across that front post, and it's a good run from Watmore as well, getting in front of his man, and it is a good finish just to flick it to the far post. And yeah, Duncan Watmore gets his goal at the Bet365 after last season, and his calamitous miss that me and you were there to see.
Yeah, a bit of redemption there. I must admit, it felt that extra bit special just because of, that horror miss. And I don't think that's being, really harsh. It was, I don't even want to get into it, to be honest. He scored at the Stoke Stadium, and that can be put in the past now. But yeah, Borough back on level terms. And actually, from that point onwards, the game sort of went back to the way it started. Middlesbrough again on top. It gets to half time, and in fairness, it didn't kill any of Middlesbrough's momentum. They come out for the second half, and again managed to retain possession very well, which was really, obviously, if you watch the game on iFollow or online, it was really, really frustrating, the Stoke commentators, which I did find funny. Some huge complaints about Chris Wilder's team keeping the ball, which I found hilarious, because, I mean, I didn't realise keeping the ball was a crime now. Obviously, it's a good job Stoke weren't playing Pep Guardiola's Barcelona team, because obviously they kept the ball, but that, in Stoke's eyes, I'm guessing they just want to see sort of Sam Allardyce lump it up at the strikers type football. Clearly, they aren't used to actually any sort of possession-based style. And actually, from that good start of the second half, Middlesbrough get themselves in front. And it's sort of a half, I think you described it before as a half Duncan Watmore goal. Great work to get the ball out wide again. Ryan Giles, as we spoke about last week, as we're probably going to speak about every podcast this season, works it onto his left foot, delivers an absolutely delicious left-footed cross into the box, and Phil Jagielka sort of throws himself at it. I think Watmore gets the first touch on the ball, and it flicks off Jagielka into the back of the Stoke goal, and Middlesbrough find themselves in front, and again, massively deserved.
Yeah, it was. We'd had a few chances just before that as well. Bowler had one chance that was saved by Bursick, and there was a Riley McGree chance that he had the ball cut back to him, and he just gets it all wrong and smashes the ball into the stand, rather than just being a bit more composed and putting the ball in the back of the net. And yeah, it was fully deserved to get that goal. It doesn't matter how they come. And yeah, 2-1 up. I think it was always going to happen that Borough were going to get that second goal. We're going to go into the lead at some point. And it felt as though Borough were comfortable. It felt as though Borough were going to extend that lead as well. It felt like the game was getting away from Stoke. And it felt like 3 points was coming to Middlesbrough, but a bit of a twist in the tail towards the end of the game. And yeah, cruel is the word to describe it.
Yeah, I think that would be the best way to describe it. Just before, obviously, we talk about Stoke's late equaliser, there was a chance for them actually to equalise before that. Brown has an effort saved by Zach Steffen, and possibly a little bit harsh. Steffen parries it really into the centre of the box, doesn't manage to parry it very wide. And Lewis Baker, who obviously we spoke about in the last podcast, as to being one of those that would come back and haunt Middlesbrough. Under pressure, manages to put the ball wide. It looked a lot worse actually on first glance. I think probably we do well to put him under that pressure and make him force the shot wide. So that was the first scare. And then the real sucker punch comes in the 91st minute, I believe. It may have been the 92nd. Either way, it was cruel. It was gut-wrenching. It was all the words that you can possibly think of. The ball is floated in from the right-hand side. And I believe the nephew of Ian Wright, DiMaggio Wright Phillips, the son of Sean Wright Phillips as well, equalises unmarked in the box, heads it into the back of the net. It's from a defensive viewpoint, it's a criminal goal to concede, really, isn't it? So late on in the game. Of course, since then we've heard Wilder sort of ask himself questions, really, as if he should have brought on defenders and really seen the 3 points out and stuck men behind the ball. But I think we sort of realise now that that's never going to be his style. And as I say, Wright Phillips, I think it's Dijksteel that he runs off and he's unmarked to head in, and it's just one of them where immediately the bottom of your stomach just sinks and you sort of sink into your chair. A horrible goal to concede and a nightmare, to be honest. You can probably tell by the tone of my voice, it's bringing back that horrible bottom of the stomach feeling.
Yeah. I can't say I was shocked, if I'm honest. Having watched Borough for all my life, this is what we do. This is more typical Borough. You compare it to Blackpool away last year, where we conceded that last-minute goal and then went up the other end and scored. That's completely different to the Borough that I know. And this was back to typical Borough. Batter a team for the full game and give away an absolute horrific goal with seconds to spare. And yeah, they can only blame themselves, unfortunately. The chances that we had in the game were good chances. They should have been put away. The game should have been put beyond Stoke, and it wasn't. And a lapse in concentration with mere seconds to go in the game has cost us. Wright Phillips uses a bit of his granddad's intelligence, gets away from Dijksteel, and in between that gap between Dijksteel and Jones finds himself unmarked with yards of space around him. Baker clips the ball beyond the pair of them, and Wright Phillips heads home. Well, I think wherever he headed the ball, Steffen was probably going to dive the other way. Because he can put it anywhere, but yeah, it wasn't the most powerful or best header I've ever seen, but the celebration was fantastic. So yeah, unfortunate. 2 points dropped, and as I've put in the notes here, 2 points drops and massive points as well. Would have been our first win of the season. would have got that sort of duck off our back that we needed to get that first win out the way, and to concede in the last minute, an absolute sickener. Yeah, it must have been horrible to be in that dressing room at full time. Wilder probably deserved to give them the hairdryer for conceding that goal, but coming out in the interview and saying that he takes some of the responsibility for that, I don't really think he probably should have done that. In fairness, I think the players should have put the game beyond doubt, but yeah, he took some of the responsibility, thought that the game would have been put beyond Stoke, and it probably should have been as well. So 2 massive points dropped. Although we did get a point away from home, it felt like a defeat because of that last minute equaliser.
Yeah, as you say, typically sort of midway through a season, if you were travelling to Stoke away, and, more often than not, Stoke sort of have that season where in and around Christmas time, they're sort of flirting with the playoffs, and then after the turn of the year, they sort of just fall off the face of the earth. But, so early on in the season, when they haven't really managed to build any momentum, as you say, there was a lot of moans and groans. I think a few Stoke fans are starting to become a little bit sick with the way that they play their football. It was a real disappointing one, in the manner of the point, of course, conceding so late on. It probably felt like a defeat for the Middlesbrough players. And like you say, Chris Wilder sort of took it on his shoulders to take responsibility and, say maybe I should have put defenders on. But as you say, I think the game could have been put to bed, really. And yeah, it just made it all the more. Yeah, so Nathan, really disappointing to drop points in that manner, especially. And as you say, obviously, Chris Wilder sort of trying to come out and deflect a little bit of the blame away from his players. But as I mentioned earlier, I don't think he's ever going to be the type of manager that's, going to do a Tony Pulis, which is quite ironic given it was Stoke, and, put 3 defenders on the pitch and just sort of hold the ball in the corner. I think Chris Wilder said himself that he's a greedy manager. He probably thought that we could get another on the attack. And, really, apart from that chance that we said that Baker misses, they'd failed to create anything really in that second half. So it was just, as we've said already, gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, just a horrible, horrible ending to that game, and massively undeserved, I felt, as well. From a Stoke fan's perspective, I think they'll have been delighted with the point. So moving on from the Stoke game, obviously, Reading away up next, and I've got to be honest, from the ending of the Stoke game, typical pessimistic Middlesbrough fan that is inside of me thought it's going to go from bad to worse. And I know I should be optimistic, and I haven't even been watching Middlesbrough for as long as what, some people listening to this podcast or watching this podcast might have, but I think it's just instilled in us both now. You obviously travelled to the game, a bit of a late decision from yourself. I bet you're regretting that one now.
It was a long trip. That's all I'll say. Yeah, up at 6 o'clock on Saturday morning. Ran out the house, got the bus, trekked down the country. And my God, it is a long trip. I didn't quite realise how long it would be. But it just felt like it was taking forever to get there. But yeah, got to Reading, a new ground for myself. So was quite pleased to go there and have a visit and see what it was about. But that was the best part of the day, in all fairness, because the performance on the pitch didn't give the fans that travelled anything to shout about at all.
No, it certainly didn't. You say the actual fact that you got a new stadium ticked off was the best part of your day. I know we waffled and went back to sort of the early days of this podcast and talked about food choices, beverages choices. We might as well talk about it again because we probably aren't going to spend all too much time actually talking about the action in the Reading game because it was that bad. Was there any highlights of the day in terms of match day cuisine, Nathan?
I'll ask your opinion on this.
Okay.
If you were at an away ground and you wanted a pint of, I can't remember the one that was on draft. Can't remember. But anyway, if you wanted a pint of beer, how much would you be willing to pay for a pint?
Are we talking sort of comparing this to a pint in the Riverside prices?
If you want,
just
yeah.
Any football stadium.
Just any football stadium, yeah.
I think anything above £5.50 and I'd really be starting to think, hang on a second, that is frightening prices. Even anything over a £5, I'm starting to think, this is getting a little bit pricey for me. But go on, I'm sure you're going to tell me the price that you paid.
So, waltz up to the concourse at the Select Car Leasing Stadium and think, yeah, I'll have a pint before the game. Settle the nerves. I mean, it's a terrifying atmosphere at Reading. So, yeah, settle the nerves a little bit. £6.10 for a pint at Reading.
Wow. That, I mean, what do you expect? What else would you expect from such a massive club like Reading? £6.10. I think it's safe to say, and I didn't even know this for definite, that you didn't go back for a second pint.
Definitely not. And I think, although it's not technically in London, I'm going to throw that Neil Warnock clip out there of, we're in London. We're in London, aren't we? What did you expect? £6 a pint? Yeah.
Yeah, that I mean,
probably.
From a bad result already, that must have made the day a lot worse. Not even a little bit worse, a lot worse. Because, as you say, getting up, and it's always a bit of a wait, of course, in the away end concourses, waiting, getting to the front of the queue, and then being told a pint of probably some bang average football stadium lager was £6.10 would have, I mean, it's a good job that you got one before the game, because after the game, I think that could have finished you off, to be honest, Nathan. We'll stop talking about the cost of pints. We'll talk a little bit, although we really don't want to, about a dismal display from Middlesbrough. Changes in the starting 11. Marcus Force comes back into the team alongside Dale Frye. Duncan Watmore and Anthony Dijksteel dropped out. Actually, a bit of a surprise to see Duncan Watmore drop out. I think we've sort of become used to him being managed a little bit for his minutes. But, it's, in fairness to Watmore, it's not a regular thing when you go and score 1.5 goals, we'll put it, and then are on the bench for the next game. So I'm sure he'll have been disappointed. I think probably the reasoning behind Dijksteel's place on the bench was probably the equaliser at Stoke. But in terms of Marcus Force coming back into the team, how did you feel about that? And obviously, of course, alongside Dale Frye, who also returned at the starting 11.
Yeah, with the back three at this moment in time, I'm just a little bit unsure with what's going on. In the Championship last season, I remember seeing Daryl Lenahan play as the right-sided centre-half in Blackburn's 3 rather than in the centre. And to see Dale Frye, who was at the centre of our defence last year, being shifted out to that right-hand side, and Lenahan taking up the middle, I just don't really understand it, if I'm honest. But Wilder knows best. That's why he's employed by the club and I'm not. So there you are. But in terms of the forwards, it's early on in the season, but it's starting to feel a little bit like it was towards the back end of last season, where you can probably toss a coin over which forward starts over the others at this minute in time, because I think they all offer similar levels of influence in games to each other. Force is obviously going to be favoured because he was brought into the club by Chris Wilder. But yeah, I'm not too sure at the minute with the forwards, but we'll get to discussing a certain Brazilian that was in the home end watching on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, we certainly will. Let's get into it, because we can't avoid it anymore. We can't sort of ramble on about the price of pints in Reading Stadium to avoid it. Let's just tackle it straight on. In fairness to Middlesbrough, didn't start horrifically, would be a kind way of putting it. Again, retained quite a lot of the early possession. A lot of that possession didn't really conjure up many chances, or any chances really at all. And again, it leads to that sucker punch of the home side taking the lead despite the early possession. A ball comes in the box. Margot tries to head the ball away and just doesn't really get a strong enough contact on it. It drops to the edge of the box, and the Reading midfielder Fauna, on loan from Nottingham Forest, hits probably the best strike, or one of the best strikes he'll ever hit in his career. A low sort of, I guess you could call it a half volley. I've seen a little bit of a debate about half volleys on Twitter the other week, but I'd call this a half volley. Flies past Stefan. I think there's a little bit of an argument as to whether Shane Long's offside. I think it would have been a great spot from the linesman, in fairness. Has he, or if he did pick it up, of course, if we had VAR in the Championship, it would have come under dispute. But it flies into the back of the net. It's a great strike, in fairness. Zach Steffen doesn't really stand any chance. And Reading take the lead, and it wasn't really deserved. I don't think either team really deserved to take the lead at that stage, but of course they find themselves in front. And again, Nathan, it's just a massive sucker punch.
Yeah, possibly. Although I did feel at the time Reading were growing in the game. Borough in the early stages had a lot of the ball, but didn't do anything with it, which was the theme of the game, really. Borough having the ball and passing the ball from side to side with no penetration at all, and no sort of intent or urgency to play forward and, well, ultimately score. But yeah, Reading had a few chances prior to the goal. I think Junior Hoylett had a shot that Stefan saved, but the goal comes from a switch of play. Jeff Hendrick jumps with Giles, and I don't think that either win a flick on, really, but Hendrick gives Giles a nudge as well that sort of disrupts how quickly Giles can get out to Yiadom. Yiadom advances slightly, and both Giles and Moet don't impact him, just let him do whatever he likes. He crosses the ball in, and it's not the best cross in the world. As you say, Bowler heads it away, but only as far as Fauna, who, just smashes the ball in the back of the net at the near post. And really, at that stage in the game, at what I'd seen so far in the opening 20, 25 minutes before the goal, I was not convinced in the slightest that we were going to get anything out of that game. It was incredibly, incredibly poor, and it felt like one of those games where Reading were only going to really have that chance. They scored it. It was a half chance, and they've put it in the back of the net, and now they're going to sit in and hit us on the counter-attack and going to make it incredibly difficult for us to create any sort of chances, really. And lo and behold, that was how the game went.
Yeah. Obviously, from that point onwards, it was a difficult watch. It really was. And Chris Wilder agreed. He was quick to make changes at half time. Riley McGree comes off and is replaced by Duncan Watmore, perhaps raising the question, should Duncan Watmore have retained his place after the goals? And also Dale Frye's taken off, as you say, starts on the right of the defensive three. I think people would agree and have agreed since, if Dale Frye is going to play in Middlesbrough's back line, he simply has to be the central defender of the three. He looked uncomfortable. I think it exposes our back line, especially because of Jones's want to bomb on, and that's no criticism of Jones. He's often high up the pitch, and it means that a lot of the time the wide centre-backs are required to defend quite wide, but also they have a responsibility to bring the ball out from the back. And although I don't think Dale Frye is horrendous at doing so, it's definitely not his strength. His strength is winning headers, winning tackles, blocking shots, being, a defender first and foremost. And after the Sheffield United subbing at half time, and after this, it's really sort of raised a lot of question marks as to where Dale Frye is going to fit into this Middlesbrough team going forward, and potentially if Dale Frye is going to have a long-term future at Middlesbrough. As you say, Daryl Lenahan's played that position. And it baffled me, to be honest, why he didn't take up that sort of wide centre-back role when he has far more experience in that position. He's a lot more comfortable on the ball. You see often when there's chances, he will more often than not try and play out from the back. And yeah, Dale Frye comes off. I don't think he was fantastic, but does it raise question marks over whether it was sort of, without discrediting Wilder's decisions too much, did it sort of play into Reading's hands, the fact that they could put Dale Frye under pressure and, work against Frye, and the fact that, it's just not his favoured position at all, really?
From what I remember of the game, which I've tried to eradicate from my memory so far, pretty much all of Reading's attacks in that first half came down Dale Frye's side, with Junior Hoylett looking to just attack him. And Junior Hoylett's one of them wingers where usually he'll try and cut inside and get a shot off or put a cross in, but he can take you down the line as well with his pace. And yeah, Frye was exposed in that right-hand side. Jones is, of course, going to play a bit further up the pitch, as he should. That's our main sort of way of creating chances, which is from the wide flanks. And yeah, Dale Frye did look uncomfortable, as you say, and yeah, it wasn't the best half of football I've ever seen from Middlesbrough on the whole either. In terms of does it raise questions? I'd really just want to see Dale Frye in the middle and Daryl Lenahan on the right, just to see why Dale Frye was opted to play in the right and Daryl Lenahan in the middle, when Lenahan looks more comfortable on the ball, as you said, and would probably suit playing that right-sided centre-half role a lot more comfortably than Dale Frye would. I just think that's just the more blatant option to go with, and to go with anything different was just a bit strange from Chris Wilder.
Yeah, it was. I think probably when we address some of the listener questions from Twitter, we'll have a more in-depth sort of discussion on Dale Frye's future. But back onto the second half, there was a slight, and I say slight, improvement in terms of Borough's control in the game and their ability to sort of sustain attacks. Nothing really of note, to be honest. Daryl Lenahan has a header later on in the second half, which is saved by the Reading goalkeeper. Duncan Watmore has a header again for that, arguably he should do better with. He opts to sort of head it into the ground rather than heading straight at the Reading goal, which I think takes all the pace off the ball and obviously results in Bizanis saving it. It was, as of all the sort of pre-season optimism and all of the good signs from games against Sheffield United, obviously West Brom, where we were terrific in the first half, even QPR away in the second half, where we showed exactly what we are going to be about and what we have been about under Chris Wilder. The Reading performance was just so far off anything that I expected. It's just so underwhelming, so disappointing. I'm actually a little bit lost for words at the performance still, because although, yes, we have disappointments against QPR and obviously the late equaliser from Stoke, but if anything, I thought that we would probably get a reaction off the back of that Stoke result, and we actually got the complete opposite, to be honest.
Yeah, it looked as though that equaliser at Stoke had just killed any sort of optimism, any sort of ambition from the players. They just looked comfortable to just play the game as if it was a training exercise, where anything that happens in the game has no sort of repercussions. As I said earlier, no penetration, no ambition, no urgency. It was just slow, just lethargic play, no energy to it at all. It was just really, really poor to watch. And to travel, as I put a post out on Twitter as I arrived back home on Saturday night, and just said a 530-mile round trip for nothing, really. They didn't show anything. And in the second half, even though we did have a few half chances, we deserved nothing out of the game. And in fairness, Reading did well in spells of the game just to keep things tight, defend their lead, and hit us on the break. And they didn't create much after their goal, but they've got another 3 points on the board. That's their third win of the season. Borough are winless. We've got 3 draws, 2 defeats, and by God, are both defeats so far this season painful. Like, seriously, wow. 2 points on the board at this moment in time. It's early on in the season, I'm going to say that. But Borough lie 23rd in the table after 5 games. They are only not rock bottom because Coventry haven't got a pitch to play on and have only played 2 fixtures. What I found strange in the week was our post with Borough's stats. It's changed now because of Saturday, but scored 7 so far this season, so goals can't really be a problem for us. We've scored 7 in 5, which isn't too bad, but conceded 9. Last season we were defensively resolute, strong in most games defensively, and this season it's all going to pot. Conceded 9. Only team that have played all 5 fixtures that has not won a game yet. No wins in all competitions, no clean sheets in all competitions, which just reiterates that defensive point. And here we are now at the end of the transfer window, nearing the end of the transfer window, still looking to sign a few more players. But it's a big question, but what's going wrong at the minute, Chris? Can you put your finger on what's going wrong?
Yeah, it is a very big question, isn't it? Look, like you said last season, excuse me, yes, there was the odd blip. There was the Barnsley game where we concede 3, and I think the goalkeeper situation had a lot to do with that last season. But there seems to have been this change, and I'm not pinning it down on any one specific player. Obviously, we've seen the introduction of Daryl Lenahan, who actually I didn't think did anything wrong, to be honest, against Stoke or Reading. But his introduction seems to have disrupted what was, yes, at times a little bit unbalanced last season, but a fairly reliable and as you say, resolute back 3. Of course, Dijksteel on the right, Dale Frye in the centre, Paddy McNair from the left. Yes, I do completely understand the need and the want from Chris Wilder for left-sided centre-back. I think just in terms of a bit of a cross-reference, you look at the Manchester United situation at the moment, and Lisandro Martinez comes under a lot of criticism, up until last night, really. But Erik ten Hag is persistent with him because of his left foot and because of the want to have those passing angles of a left-sided defender in a back 3, or even a back 2. It's all about passing angles and what that can create. But in terms of what it's done to our general defending, it just seems to have it's not a huge analytical way of sort of discussing it, but it just seems to have jumbled up everything that was really sort of good. Paddy McNair's obviously been in midfield. Okay, that's through Crooks' illness originally. I don't think that's his best position. I think for me, and Neil Warnock said it a few seasons back, Paddy McNair is an excellent defender and a pretty average midfielder. I still agree with that statement. Anthony Dijksteel, yes, he probably should be more switched on for the Stoke equaliser. But whilst we don't have that left-sided centre-back, which obviously would have been filled by Paddy McNair last season and, in my opinion, should have this season, he would be filling in on the right-hand side, is able to carry the ball, good range of passing, and more often than not is quite solid. So, I mean, the defence has been a huge issue. The midfield, we go back to a few weeks back. Okay, yes, we've brought Alex Mowat in, but something seems to be still missing from that. And I can't quite put my finger on that, whether it's, I've done a tweet after the game and a lot of people agreed. I know some people disagreed, but it was to the point of we've lost our ball carrier. We've lost that little bit of sort of combative, just bite in midfield to really have a hunger to get out and help defensively. And we don't really have any sort of connection between midfield and attack. Of course, I'm talking about Marcus Tavernier, and I don't really want to get into that because at the end of the day, he's not coming back now. Do you know what I mean? We have to move on from that now. But it's just, it looked really disjointed. We look, and I never really thought under Chris Wilder I'd ever be saying this, we look quite an easy team to sort of go up against. If you get in our faces and you put the back line under a little bit of pressure, we sort of just allow it to happen. And I've seen a few suggestions about potentially that we aren't progressing the ball through midfield due to Johnny House, and I don't think that's a huge issue. There's so many small issues which have been built up and sort of, been the result of these bad performances and the really poor start of the season. And it's just, as you say, it's underwhelming. But the only sort of silver lining, if you want to call it that, is we're still only, 5 league games into the season. We've obviously had some good news on the transfer front that we'll get into. And I just hope that sort of sparks us into life, because, I mean, Chris Wilder said afterwards, I think it was his worst day or one of the worst in charge of Middlesbrough. And I don't think you could disagree with him, because the performance just simply wasn't good enough.
Yeah, and I don't really think that the performance on its own is what we've come to expect from Chris Wilder's Middlesbrough. Everything that we've come to expect is just completely different, really. We like that being on the front foot, looking to create chances and putting our game onto opposition teams, and we just didn't do that on Saturday. It was, as I said, just devoid of any sort of energy and ideas of how to create chances. It was, we'll switch it out to Jones, and then we'll try and play a triangle to make an angle to pass him in behind, like we did against Sheffield United for the first goal. It hasn't worked, so we'll knock it back into Frye, who's at right centre half. And then instead of just making one pass to the other side, it was to Lenahan, and then it was to Baller, which makes it even slower and allows Reading to get over. And then we'll try the same down the left-hand side with Giles. And it was just very, very poor. And really, watching it was nearly putting me to sleep, if I'm honest. It was so repetitive. It was so boring. It was just crap, really. It was really, really poor. And now we have a week before our next game. We've got some news on the transfer front, which we'll get into, which has been good news, has provided me and Borough fans with a little bit of relief, if I'm honest. But with how many days is it now until the end of the window? Is it the 1st of September, or is it a few days in?
It finishes next Tuesday. Bearing in mind, obviously, we're recording this a little bit later than we usually would. We're recording it on Tuesday night. So exactly a week we've got left.
So a week left in the window, and Borough are probably targeting, I'd say, 2 definite players at this moment in time. I am saying that because I think one of them's done to make it a third. But yeah, definitely a few more additions needed to the forward positions, and we need another body in midfield that can just create and provide us with some sort of idea on how to get in behind for our wing backs and just slide those balls through. Because McGree, if you want to play him in the 10, that's okay. He looked okay at Stoke in the first half, but yeah, at Reading, you could see why he was dragged off. There was no point in being there. Completely anonymous. And do you want to know what? I kind of regret saying what I said about Crooksy a few weeks ago, saying that he probably needed to step out from the side because he doesn't provide that much energy. But what he does do, which I didn't quite realise how much of it he does do and how much we missed it with him being out the side, he just progresses the ball and just passes forward. And other midfielders that we have at this moment in time, both Moat, okay, it's hard to judge because I've only seen a week of him, but Moat and McGree haven't been passing forward and looking to go forward. McGree's the most frustrating player I've ever seen in my life because I watch him and he gets the ball on the half turn and he'll almost pretend like he's going to pass forward and then he'll just knock it back to Howson.
Yeah.
And it frustrates the life out of me because as a creative midfielder, he just should be doing more for me. But Crooks back in the side is a must, really. And it'll be interesting to see what Wilder does in the next game, especially with McNair. And he's adamant that McNair's a right-sided centre-half, although we've got Daryl Frye that he tries to play there, although he's not a right-sided centre-half, and Daryl Lenahan that can play there, and Anthony Dijksteel. So we've got 4 players there that Chris Wilder feels can fill that role. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he does. He's certainly got a selection headache for, it looks like the right side of centre half, because it looks as though the centre is nailed on going to be Daryl Lenahan, as we saw on Saturday. So we'll just have to wait and see what this week brings. But hopefully it brings improvement, because Saturday killed me.
Yeah. I think anyone listening now is probably thinking, oh my God, can these two please put a little bit of a positive spin on? But yeah, it was massively frustrating. It's a week that I think most Middlesbrough fans will want to, and possibly some already have forgotten about. Before we do move on to the positive news, because there is positive news, and that should be pulling people through this week after a poor 2 results. We should first, of course, as we always do, have a look back and go through some of the questions that we received on Twitter. And I must say, firstly, the response probably due to the performance, a lot of questions out of anger, to be honest. But we'll get into a few of them. I'll have a quick flick through now, Nathan, and select some which I think deserve to be talked about. We sort of discussed the back three and the fact that it isn't right. But James Boyle, that is, asks about Dale Frye. I know I said we talk about him more in depth. You sort of touched on it there, the options that we now have for that right-sided centre-back. I think now, and it really sort of dawned on me today with the news, and obviously you probably know who we're talking about by now, another addition in defence, a much needed addition, that we look a little bit heavy in the defensive department. And that is down to the fact, obviously Chris Wilder views, as you say, Paddy McNair as a right-sided centre-back, Anthony Dijksteel as a right-sided centre-back, and due to his sort of trust in Daryl Lenahan to play as that central defender in the back three, it feels to me, and this is just my own gut feeling, that there's probably going to be an exit in that department. And the one after the substitutions and some of the things that have been said in the press, that if there is going to be a departure, it will be Daryl Frye. I mean, basically, Nathan, what would you think about that possibility? Because although there's been no sort of concrete links or solid sort of information that he is available, I just don't see how he's going to manage to find the right amount of game time for three players that played nigh on all of our games last season as part of that back three.
Yeah. It's a horrible one, really. Having watched Daryl Frye come into the side as a young lad from the academy and watching him progress over the years as a centre-half in a two, as a right wing-back under Tony Pulis. Wow.
That, do you know what? That makes me feel grateful. That was the positive message that I needed to put a slight smile on my face, because even though this week has been a real poor one for the standards that we've become used to under Chris Wilder, that was a real low point. Them 6 defeats on the bounce. Grateful we're not at that stage. But I'll let you continue, Nathan.
Yeah. So Dale, watching him progress from a young lad that when he first came into the side just looked like a centre-half that was comfortable in youth football and needed to fill out to be able to deal with the big centre-forwards that the Championship has to offer. It has been quite wonderful, really, seeing him play for England at youth level and pretty much prove himself as one of the best defenders in England outside of the Premier League. And to see him just sort of dropped like a stone by Chris Wilder after the signing of Daryl Lenahan is massively frustrating, especially because in my eyes, he's one of the best defenders in this division comfortably. In the centre of a back three last year, he was massively comfortable with McNair and Dijksteel next to him. He dealt with, it was a team effort, but for the sake of it, he dealt with Cristiano Ronaldo and Harry Kane in the FA Cup run. And yeah, it'd be such a shame and such a just a waste of the final sort of 2 years of his current contract to just let him go to I hazard a guess at a side that's in the bottom half of the Premier League that'd pick him up because of how he's performed in the Championship. But what a loss that would be. I think perhaps I would be thinking, if I was the manager, and this is just sheer greed from myself, but the 4 defenders that can fill that right hand side, at this current stage. Yeah, Daryl Lenahan, who's just come in, Anthony Dijksteel, Dale Frye, Paddy McNair. I'd just take McNair out of the question of playing in that right centre half role. Although Wilder's evidently a massive fan of saying that he can fill in at that role. Although he has Anthony Dijksteel and other options there, I'd have McNair as your left-sided centre half because he looked comfortable there last year. Okay, Wilder's a massive fan of balance, as we've heard every sort of week from the back end of last season onwards. I think McNair's shown that he can play that role comfortably and very well. And if he doesn't play there, he can fill in Johnny Howson's role well. He can fill in Crooksey's role quite well. He's a versatile player. He can fill in pretty much everywhere. As the song goes, he plays everywhere. Dijksteel, comfortable in that right-sided centre-half role. Just at times, just like loses concentration, and I don't really understand why. Daryl Lenahan, from what I've seen of him so far, looks very comfortable, looks comfortable on the ball, sometimes too comfortable, and possibly should just be playing in that right-sided centre-half role. I think at this moment in time, if you asked me for my back three, it'd be McNair on the left, Dale Frye in the middle, and Daryl Lenahan on the right at this moment in time. And unfortunately, Chris Wilder has seen something different and no longer fancies Dale Frye to be the focal point of his defence and the cornerstone of the back three, which is unfortunate because it, as a left-sided or right-sided centre-half, Dale Frye looks completely just uncomfortable on the ball and stepping out. He looks like he shouldn't be playing there. Saturday showed me that he doesn't look comfortable like Anthony Dijksteel does in that role. And yeah, if one defender needs to go at this moment in time, all fingers point to Dale Frye, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think obviously people will probably be listening to this and screaming now, saying, well, of course we've, by all accounts, got an incoming left-sided centre-back, so it makes the situation even more difficult. It's a serious headache. But for me, I think it's clear that Paddy McNair is viewed as the first choice right-sided centre-back. Anthony Dijksteel's probably going to be his understudy. Daryl Lenahan, who I've got to admit, personally, yes, I think he's been okay. He's a solid addition. I think Dale Frye's a better defender than him in the central position of a back three. That may cause a little bit of a debate, but you know, I think as annoying and frustrating as you say there, I think the writing's on the wall for Dale Frye. Unfortunately, he's just although you need depth, you know, and yes, to be greedy, you would like to keep all of them, but Anthony Dijksteel should be playing first team football in a good championship team. Paddy McNair certainly should be. Dale Frye should be. Of course, the name that we've sort of been hinting at, Matt Clark, is going to play. And it's just not going to work, unfortunately, if they are all... And the thing is as well, which makes it even worse, and I mean, it's causing us a headache, so, I mean, it's even more of a headache for Chris Wilder. You look at Paddy McNair, and personally, in a few comments I've actually addressed it, I think it's almost a waste of playing him in midfield. I don't know why it is, because he has all the attributes to carry the ball forward, and we see it from defence. I don't know if it's just because he has a deeper deeper on the pitch, is able to sort of view the game ahead of him, and that gives him that extra bit of sort of room to operate in. I'm not quite sure, but I wouldn't play him there, and I think it's a waste of that position. It is just, for me, one of those where someone is going to have to depart, because otherwise people are going to be very, very disappointed. I even seen suggestions about moving Dijksteel as a defensive midfielder, and he has attributes certainly, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So I think, as long-winded as what we've made it, unfortunately, could be wrong, I think the writing's on the wall for Daryl Frye, and I would not be surprised in the slightest if he departs between now and the end of the window, as much as I don't want that to happen. Moving on from that, because, although it's probably our biggest issue right now, I think people are probably bored of talking about it, the midfield, and people mentioning that creativity that we seem to lack. There's actually a player that I know of who I think could have been great, progressing the ball and being that player to sort of break lines and add that little bit of spark. He's currently out on loan in Argentina, playing for Boca Juniors, I think. Goes by the name of Martin Piero, very highly rated, but unfortunately not by anyone at Middlesbrough Football Club. But without dwelling on that, because we're already upset enough about Marcus Tavernier going, that seems again like another issue that needs addressed. We spoke about it and the need for a left-sided midfielder, of course, in the central three. Now, I don't know if it's a right-sided of the three that we need, or if it's a deep-lying playmaker. The balance just seems off again in midfield, and it's so difficult for Chris Wilder, because, we know for a fact now that he wants another forward and he wants another midfielder, but it remains to be seen what type of midfielder he wants. Do you think we need a Johnny Howson replacement, or do you think it is that sort of, I guess, Martin Piero-esque type player that's going to come in off the right, perhaps, because we have Mowat and McGree now for the left, and be that sort of defence splitter, little spark that we seem to be missing at the moment again?
Being greedy, I'd want both, if I'm honest.
And to be honest, unfortunately, I can't see that happening either.
No, neither can I.
I'm going to put you under pressure here, Nathan, and say you have to select one, because I think that's all we'll get.
Well, if I had to select one, it'd be your type of midfielder that just offers more creative spark, one that would sort of fit in that Matt Crooks position. I just feel that Johnny Howson's just very comfortable, and whilst he probably will need replacing at some point, because he's getting on, isn't he, Johnny Howson? The constant 1 year extensions at Middlesbrough Football Club are going to come to an end at some point, as much as I don't want that to happen, because I love Johnny Howson. But yeah, we're just crying out for some creativity in midfield. Tavernier could do it all, really, from the left side. He could create, he could defend, he had energy in midfield, and we're not going to replace him. It's just not going to happen. There's not a player out there that's in our price bracket that we could replace Marcus Tavernier's attributes with. It's just impossible, unfortunately. But that's the position that I'd look to strengthen, really. I think that McNair, as I've just said earlier on, is versatile enough to be an option in midfield in both that crux role, as we've seen him played in midweek and at Reading. And he can also play in that Johnny Howson role, should he be asked to, if there is an injury to Johnny Howson, God forbid there isn't. But yeah, it'd be just a creative midfielder. We're crying out for someone to be able to slip balls in behind for our centre forwards and our wing backs that are bombing on. So a creative midfielder would be top of my wish list at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think, in fairness, despite the quantity of questions that we got, all of them either mentioned the defensive situation and the midfield situation. So, although I do feel like we've sort of went round the houses a little bit there and discussed it for so long, it's, it is a real headache. We've sort of given our opinion. It remains to be seen if Chris Wilder will be greedy and keep, all of the defenders that we currently have, because, although it's a bad thing in terms of finding that balance, it ultimately comes down to the fact that we have players of a quality where actually none of them are going to be happy to sit on the bench. So it's a positive in a negative, if you want to put that sort of spin on it. Moving completely on from that now and on to the more exciting, the more positive stuff. I think it's about time we've made everyone wait long enough, Nathan. We'll try and do it in somewhat of a chronological order from the way it sort of unfolded in the past week. Transfer news. The first news of the week was Emile Rees, I think, of Preston. Links coming out that, of course, we were considering an approach. There's yet to be really an official approach from reports. There seems to be a lot of, people saying that we're considering one, lining up a bid, all those sorts of phrases, none of which have come in, of course. We know that Preston have addressed the speculation. But actually, nothing's sort of progressed since then, really, which is a little bit strange, but I guess it's just one of them where we sort of have to wait now. A little bit, and I've just said positive, a bit of a negative, actually, later on last week was the fact that Jacob Greaves, one of, the real clear targets of Chris Wilder this transfer window, has signed a new deal at Hull. Of course, it was made public that we had numerous bids rejected for him, and he signed his new deal. That news then seemed to warrant a lot of Hull fans to try and force some bizarre sort of rivalry with Middlesbrough, obviously because of the fact that they've had a fairly decent start of the season, despite being non-existent in the Championship for about 5 years now. And yeah, it's disappointing, but there's been a positive development in that position, which of course we'll get onto after the news of Rodrigo Muniz finally confirmed, Nathan. I made the video, put it out, a short story. It's been a year-long story. He's been playing with our emotions now for weeks in the transfer window. We were told months back, if Fulham found their replacement, then Middlesbrough would have him eventually. We finally got our man. The news comes out before the Reading game. He's in attendance at the Reading game. Fortunately, he didn't run a mile and refused to sign for us off the back of that. it's all done and dusted. He joins on a season-long loan. We finally got our man, and we finally got a much-needed forward who you think, given that he's been given the number 9 shirt, is going to be one of, if not the first sort of striker that Chris Wilder will go for when he's available.
Yeah. What a long saga this has been. I can't really believe that a year's gone by since we were first talking about him and watching daft YouTube compilations of his time at Flamengo. But he's here. We have our forward, our Brazilian number 9. And before getting too serious and getting sort of into what he offers this Middlesbrough side, I just keep thinking about Blackpool away in September and stood on that horrific stand with a Brazilian flag like I was last year with my Slovenian flag, just serenading a Borough forward. And yeah, it's the stuff that dreams are made of. But anyway, yeah, Rodrigo Muniz had the second best goals to minute ratio in the Championship last season, behind Alexander Mitrovic, who scored again in the Premier League this weekend, which, I mean, it goes to show Fulham's centre-forward recruitment is absolutely fantastic. And hopefully now that we're getting a bit of a slice of that, hopefully we have a forward that gets into double digits. Watching the interview the other day with Muniz, his English isn't the best, but as long as he understands what UTB means and put the ball in the back of the net, then hopefully that's all he needs to know.
Yeah, as you say, Nathan, really endearing interview, I've got to be honest. I mean, of course, due to the fact that it's been such a long saga, you already want him to succeed. Of course you do, like any signing. But that's one factor in it. But the interview, the sort of broken English, the fact that his face lit up as soon as the Borough media team mentioned sort of his antics on Twitter, the fact that he's known for long enough now that it would eventually happen, and he's found a little bit of pleasure in sort of just having a little bit of a joke about it, liking the odd tweet. I say the odd tweet, liking pretty much any tweet that mentioned his name in Middlesbrough in the same sentence. I'm just delighted that it's finally done. And I've got to say, and I know you shouldn't really have these sort of biases about certain players, but I think this could be the new player where I just want him. I just want it to work out for him more than anyone. And, you know, the Brazilian factor, the transfer saga, just the fact that he never stopped smiling in that first interview. I can't wait to see him play. I'm generally really excited by this signing. A lot of people sort of lost faith and thought, well, it's took this long. It sort of took a bit of a shine off it, but I'm just delighted it's finally over the line. And what a cracking set of teeth, I must say as well, because they are the whitest things I've ever seen.
Oh, he's probably got them turkey teeth, but all I'm going to say, Chris, is never fall in love with a lone player.
Well, it's too late, Nathan. Already, I'm in love with him, and that could come back to haunt me massively. I hope it doesn't, but it's too late now. You've spoken about the Brazilian flag. I'm head over heels already for him, undeservedly, to be honest, because you know his goal to minute ratio, is impressive, but he hasn't really had an awful lot of minutes for Fulham last season in the Championship. This is going to be the opportunity for him to get those valuable minutes under his belt. And yeah, it's just, you can probably tell I'm just glad it's done. That is the best way to say it. Just please don't be terrible, and I would I will consistently back you, Rodrigo. So yeah, I think I've lost my head a bit, to be honest, just thinking about him backing on Saturday. It's been that long. My head's just exploded, the fact that it's actually done. More positive news now. I like this, Nathan, because there's a positive spin on this. After a real tough slog of the first hour and whatever of the podcast, more positive news incoming. Today, after the news last night that we'd seemingly been pipped to the signing of Matt Clark, left-footed centre-back, bald head, fantastic beard. Everyone was disappointed. And then John Percy of the Telegraph drops a bomb and says he's having his medical today. 2.25 million deal agreed. Graham Potter's confirmed that he's on his way, confirmed that we're getting a good player and a good person. We finally get that left-hand sided centre-back. He's won about a gazillion Player of the Year awards at his previous clubs. It's one of the three positions going into this week that we knew we were going to target. And for once, touch wood, at the time of recording, it looks like this is going to be announced and going to be revealed, and it all seems to be wrapped up. Nathan, how pleased are you with this? The fact that we can now cross another vital position in Chris Wilder's team off the list.
Yeah, it's an important position to tick off. Gives us that balance in defence that is so evidently needed and so evidently desired by Chris Wilder. And we're getting a really good player as well. I think following the news of Greaves' new contract, I did give you a message and say, do you want to know who we should go and have a look at? And it was Clark from Brighton. Didn't really understand why he hadn't been picked up sooner by a Championship side, us included, in all fairness. But he was heading into the final year of his Brighton contract, which makes him available on the cheap a little bit, and 2.25 million seems like a very, very good fee to get a player like Clark at. A left-sided centre-half that has proved he's more than comfortable in the Championship. Player of the Year at Portsmouth a few years ago in League One before getting that move to Brighton, and then going out on loan at Derby and West Brom and winning Player of the Year at both of those clubs in back-to-back seasons respectively. So a very decent player at this level, still only 25 as well. So it's a player that's coming in for a cheap fee, that is young, has the ability to improve and has potential as well to just get better. So really pleased with this transfer. Let's hope that it's announced before Saturday so we have that balance.
Yeah, as we say, we've sort of been hinting at it throughout the podcast, but obviously we try to sort of keep it in somewhat of an order, although we do sort of angle off onto God knows what, obviously including the price of Reading's pints. But yeah, as you say, I'm just as happy with this as what I would have been with Jacob Greaves. I know probably Greaves has got age on his side and potentially is a little bit more comfortable on the ball in terms of a little bit of a better passer. But actually, if someone had said, you know, you have the choice of the two left-sided centre-backs, Chris Wilder wants this profile of player, I probably would have said either or, to be honest. What I like about this is from Greaves, there's not a sort of obvious drop off in terms of our next target on the list. Okay, I think actually Greaves has probably been the number one target because of the his age profile and the ability to potentially then sell him on in future years had he have come in and all that. But in terms of a good age at 25, some really good experience, as we've said, Player of the Year awards at Portsmouth, Derby, and West Brom. And the fact that the fact that Graham Potter, and Brighton, of course, were willing to pay the money for him to go to Brighton, because we've seen their record with defenders and their just recruitment in general. For me, if you look at any player now at Brighton, they have about 40 players that could all sort of comfortably play in the Championship. So yeah, it's all positive for me. Delighted with it. Obviously, as we say, it should be announced in the next 24 hours. Touch wood again. Touch wood again. Touch wood again. Medical was supposedly happening today. And yeah, what a positive to sort of build our way up to the preview of the next Middlesbrough match, of course. Swansea City at home. Russell Martin's side, known for their good football, but potentially known also this season for a little bit of a soft underbelly. We saw them throw away a 2-goal lead a few weeks back against Millwall, I believe it was. And a lot of the fans quite worried, actually, because of their lack of transfer activity and their lack of depth in the squad. I think I've seen a clip, or it may have been a photo of a fan, and I know you can't take everything as gospel off Twitter, that someone had actually shouted to Russell Martin, "Are we going to make any subs?" And he actually turned around to a fan and said, "I'd love to, but quite frankly, we don't even have the depth on the bench to do so." I even seen a few sort of mutterings on Twitter that Russell Martin's becoming tired of the fact he's not really being supported by the Swansea chairman and hierarchy with the ability, because we've seen what they can do. Some really impressive performances and results last season. Standout players, obviously, the front two of Obafemi and Joel Pirot, who now doesn't really look like he will be leaving. I think a lot of their business probably depended on him actually being sold, but I don't think anyone was willing to pay the 15 million or so I think that they were after for him. Obviously, it's a huge game. What are your thoughts on this? Going into the game, because I don't often think that at this stage of the season there is must-win games. But in terms of just the general morale and just getting those first 3 points of the season, I'm viewing this as a game that we actually have to win.
I'm not going to lie. Up until today, and literally a minute ago until you've mentioned Saturday, I was all right. But now I'm absolutely just shitting myself. I'm not going to lie, because I was thinking earlier on today about our upcoming fixtures, and we've got Swansea on Saturday. Okay, going to be a difficult game. Swansea are always comfortable in possession. When they came to Riverside last year, they dominated the ball and were hit with Borough going in behind. Sol Bamba played a fantastic ball in behind for Jones, who ran pretty much the length of the pitch chasing the pass, and then scored his first goal for Borough. But then following that, we've got a horrific week. Watford away, which is as difficult as they come. And then on the Monday night, them lot, which we'll not speak about yet because it's too far away and I don't want to panic. But we need to get that first win on the board. It's our last, is it? No, it's not the last game of the month, but going the back end of August without a win in the season would be not catastrophic, but just incredibly poor and not great for morale or belief. So back at the Riverside against a side that are very comfortable in possession, but who are struggling as much as us, I'd say, at this moment in time. A game where I believe it's there for the taking. We can beat Swansea, but we need to be on our game. We can't throw in a Reading performance again. It was lacklustre and devoid of any sort of attributes that we've seen from Chris Wilder's Middlesbrough so far. We need a fully fit and fully firing Chris Wilder's Middlesbrough with a Brazilian up front to score all the goals. And it's as simple as that, really. We need our forwards to be firing, and I do feel that it will be Muniz on Saturday, and everything is crossed for him to fire and get us that first win, because it'll just relieve all sorts of tension off the players' shoulders. It'll relieve everything if there's any sort of weight on fans around the club and feeling a bit down going into games. And my God, it'll make our podcasts a bit more upbeat, because that first hour was horrific.
Yeah, I echo that, to be honest. It was, I mean, if you've got to this stage, or if you haven't skipped to this stage, then my full credit goes to you, because that was probably a tough listen. And I'm not going to lie, it probably reflected the performance of Reading, but this is what Middlesbrough does to us sometimes. It really does drop you into those sort of levels of despair where you're struggling to find the words. But as you say, Nathan, looking ahead, we've obviously got some positive news today with Matt Clark. Rodrigo Muniz is through the door and should be making his debut. Of course, just touching on it finally on the Swansea game, we have one player returning at the Riverside, Nathan Wood, of course, for a long time seen as really the next answer to Middlesbrough's centre-half problems. I mean, it's a good job he's still not here, because we have even more defenders and he probably would have been even further down the pecking order. But he got his move to Swansea. Fairly mixed reviews, some good signs that Swansea fans have seen, but a few signs of a little bit of naivety, which I think was probably ultimately the reason why he was let go by Middlesbrough on a permanent basis. Of course, there's that added little bit of narrative to the game. Of course, we're not going to give any predictions because we don't want to curse it. But Nathan, before we wrap it up, I just think that this game is so good because so good. Dear me, I can't even speak. I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to be at the Riverside. I want to get those first 3 points of the season. I think this game is so big because the momentum will quickly turn. I wouldn't be surprised if the stadium's a little bit nervy to start off with. An early goal would be perfect. But even if that doesn't come, I think everyone attending just has to make sure that we stay behind the team, continue to support. And if we do get that win, bear in mind we've got a few days left of this week. We then go into the following week with that momentum of the 3 points, potentially, and going into the final few days of the transfer window, that it might even be the difference between a big Norwegian fella thinking, do you know what, I'm handing him my transfer request. I highly doubt it, because I think he pretty much has already made it quite clear that he wants to move. But it's all about the small things in football. And if a 3 points on Saturday makes that difference, then there you go, Nathan. It just proves how big a result it would. have been. Of course, we've got everything crossed for Saturday, Nathan. Thank you very much. I think we've got to say thank you for that first hour, because it really was a slog for probably
It was.
and ourselves. But Nathan, unless you have anything more to add, I want to leave it on a positive note, so please don't bring up any negative things. I'm not going to. Is there anything I've missed?
Not to my knowledge. I just hope everyone has a good bank holiday weekend with the Borough 3 points.
Yes, of course, that would be absolutely perfect. So from me and Nathan, thank you ever so much for watching and listening. Be sure to leave us a review on the audio platforms that you may listen on. Subscribe, of course, to the YouTube channel. Keep an eye on our Twitter in the final week of the transfer window. We'll try and keep you up to date as we possibly can. And that has been another episode of the Boropolis Podcast. And we will see you next week.